These senile old men should close up shop, the town official said when he saw the elderly man fixing bikes behind the church. The old man didn't respond, just continued adjusting the chain on a child's bicycle. 3 days later, Air Force One unexpectedly landed at the town's old airport. The man in the dark blue suit said, "We need to find the person who fixed a red bicycle in 1985. Why did the entire town stand up when they learned the truth about the old man? Welcome to QH, let's uncover what really happened. Calvin Shaw had been a fixture in Harlan's Mill, Nebraska for so long that most people couldn't remember when he'd first appeared. At 82, his thin frame moved with a careful precision of someone who had learned to conserve energy. His hands gnarled but remarkably steady when holding tools. For over 3 decades, he had lived in a small room behind the old First Methodist Church, a building that had stood vacant since the congregation built their new modern facility across town 5 years ago. Every day, rain or shine, Calvin would set up his makeshift bicycle repair station in the shade of the massive oak tree that dominated the church's backyard. His workbench was a simple plywood board stretched across two sawhorses, his tools organized meticulously in an old fishing tackle box. A hand-painted wooden sign, its letters faded but still legible, read simply, "Free bicycle repairs, if you need help, I'm here." Calvin never advertised his services, never sought recognition. He simply showed up every morning at 8 o'clock, ready to fix flat tires, adjust brakes, or replace broken chains for anyone who needed it, particularly children and those who couldn't afford the town's only commercial bike shop. He charged nothing, accepting only the occasional homemade cookie or thank you card from grateful children. "Why do you do this for free?" people would occasionally ask. Calvin's answer never varied. Everybody needs a working bicycle. Not everybody has money. The arrangement had continued peacefully until Harlan's Mill received a federal community development grant. Suddenly, the abandoned church property became valuable real estate in the eyes of the town council. "We could transform that eyesore into something useful," declared Logan Price, the recently elected head of town planning, during a council meeting. "A modern community center would serve everyone, not just the handful of people getting their bikes fixed by some eccentric old man." The vote to repurpose the church property passed unanimously. Marcus was appointed to oversee the project, including the responsibility of relocating any current occupants. The following Monday, Marcus arrived at Calvin's repair station by two public works employees. Calvin was hunched over a child's purple bicycle, carefully aligning the handlebars. "Mr. Shaw," Marcus announced without preamble, "the town has approved redevelopment of this property. Your bicycle hobby is creating liability issues for the town. That sign needs to come down today and your equipment needs to be removed by Friday." Calvin looked up, squinting slightly in the morning sun. Several children who had been waiting with their bicycles watched anxiously. "These senile old men living off others' goodwill need to make way for progress," Marcus muttered to one of his employees loud enough for Calvin to hear. "He's becoming an eyesore himself." Calvin said nothing. He simply finished adjusting the handlebars, tested them, and handed the bicycle back to the waiting girl. Then he stood slowly, walked to his workbench, and began gathering his tools. By afternoon, word had spread throughout Harlan's Mill. Several parents called the town office to protest, but were told the decision was final. The children were more direct. A group of 10 assembled on the church lawn with signs reading, "Save Mr. Calvin's Bike Shop." But their small demonstration attracted little attention beyond a few sympathetic honks from passing cars. Calvin himself offered no resistance. He simply moved his operation closer to the church wall, directly under the spreading branches of the oak tree, making his presence less obvious from the street. His sign now rested against the trunk of the tree rather than standing on its own post. 3 days later, Calvin was back at work, fixing the brakes on a small red bicycle, when an unusual sound drew his attention skyward. The distinctive roar of large jet engines, something rarely heard over this small Midwestern town, grew louder. Residents emerged from shops and homes, shading their eyes as they stared at the approaching aircraft. As the massive plane descended toward the town's seldom-used airstrip, a convoy of black SUVs with government plates sped through Main Street, heading toward the church. The lead vehicle stopped at the church gate, and several men in dark suits emerged, scanning the area intently. One man wearing a distinctive navy blue suit approached Calvin directly. "Sir, we're looking for Calvin Shaw, would that be you?" When everyone turns their back, only conscience remains. "Want to know what happened next?" The sudden appearance of government vehicles sent ripples of confusion through Harlan's Mill. Residents gathered at a safe distance, whispering theories ranging from national security threats to tax audit. Logan Price pushed through the growing crowd, straightening his tie as he approached the scene. "I'm the head of town planning," he announced importantly to the nearest suit-clad figure. What's this about? The man barely glanced at him before returning his attention to Calvin. Sir, are you Calvin Shaw? Calvin nodded slowly, setting down his wrench. That's me. By now, 4 black SUVs had formed a perimeter around the church grounds. The man in the navy suit introduced himself as Thomas Briggs, National Security Advisor to the President. Miss Shaw, someone would like to speak with you, Briggs said. Someone who says you fixed his red bicycle in the summer of Calvin's weathered face remained impassive, though a slight furrow appeared between his brows as he mentally searched through thousands of repairs performed over decades. Could be, fixed a lot of bikes over the years. This particular bicycle belonged to a 9-year-old boy. You replaced the chain, fixed the gears, and realigned the handlebars. You also added reflectors and a new bell. A flicker of recognition crossed Calvin's face. Bell shaped like a rocket ship, red bike with white stripes on the fenders. Briggs's professional demeanor softened slightly. That's the one. What's this about? Calvin asked, wiping his hands on a rag that was already stained with decades of grease. Shaw, we need you to prepare for a visitor, Briggs replied. Air Force One has just landed at your local airfield. The President of the United States would like to see you. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Logan Price's face drained of color. President, why would the President? Calvin began, then trailed off as realization dawned. That little boy with the red bike, Briggs nodded. President David Langston was that 9-year-old boy. He was staying with his grandmother for the summer while his mother worked 2 jobs in the city. That bicycle was his only means of transportation and his most prized possession. Within 20 minutes, the presidential motorcade appeared on the horizon, moving steadily toward the church. Secret Service agents positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter, as the crowd of townspeople grew larger by the minute. When the motorcade stopped, President David Langston emerged from his limousine without ceremony, and at 47 he cut an impressive figure, tall and athletic, with a confident bearing of someone accustomed to leadership. But as he approached Calvin, his presidential demeanor gave way to something more personal, almost boyish. Mr. Shaw, the president said, extending his hand. You probably don't remember me, but I've never forgotten you. Calvin stood straighter than he had in years, accepting the handshake with a firm grip that belied his age. Mr. President, your bike had playing cards close pinned to the spokes, made it sound like a motorcycle. President Langston's face broke into a wide smile. You do remember? The 2 men stood face to face, one the most powerful leader in the world, the other a humble bicycle repairman, connected by a moment from decades past. When I was 9 years old, the president began, speaking loudly enough for all gathered to hear. My bicycle broke. The chain snapped completely, the gears were jammed, and the handlebars were twisted from a fall. I was devastated. That bike was everything to me, my freedom, my joy, my only real possession of value. He turned to face the crowd, which now included television cameras hastily set up by news crews that had followed the presidential motorcade. I pushed that broken bike for 3 miles until I found this place. I was crying because I knew my mother couldn't afford repairs, and then I met Mr. The president gestured toward Calvin. He didn't ask why I was alone, or where my parents were, or whether I could pay. He just said, let me see what I can do. Calvin shifted uncomfortably under the attention, but the president continued, Mr. Shaw didn't just fix my bicycle that day. He taught me something fundamental, that the poor deserve help without interrogation, that kindness doesn't need justification, that dignity costs nothing to give but means everything to receive. From his suit pocket, President Langston withdrew a laminated photograph and handed it to Calvin. The image showed a skinny 9-year-old boy, sitting proudly on a freshly repaired red bicycle. Behind him stood a much younger Calvin Shaw, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. Beside them stood a tired-looking woman, the president's late mother, her expression a mixture of gratitude and pride. My mother kept this photo until the day she died, the president said softly. She wrote on the back, the only one who helped without asking why we needed it. Calvin studied the photograph, then looked up at the president. I remember now, your mother tried to pay me with a $5 bill. Looked like it hurt her to part with it. It was her grocery money for the next day, President Langston confirmed. She told me later she would have gone hungry to keep my bike working. It was the only way I could get to the summer program that kept me off the streets. But you refused to take it. Calvin nodded. Nobody should have to choose between eating and keeping their kid's bike running. President Langston turned to address the crowd again. I've achieved many things in my life. I've passed legislation, negotiated treaties, and made decisions that affected millions. But I never forgot the lesson I learned right here, from this man, that true service asks nothing in return. That lesson shaped my approach to public service, to policymaking, and to understanding what people really need. He placed his hand on Calvin's shoulder. "You didn't just fix my bike, Mr. Reed. You helped fix my life's direction, and today I've come to say thank you." The crowd had fallen completely silent, many wiping away tears. Even Logan Price stood transfixed, his earlier disdain replaced by something approaching awe. Calvin, never comfortable with attention, simply nodded and said, "Just did what needed doing, sir." "That," replied the president with a smile, "is precisely the point. Has anyone ever helped you without asking who you were? Share your story and type GRATFUL if you still remember them." President Langston wasn't finished. With cameras rolling and the entire town watching, he turned his attention to the church property. "I understand there are plans to demolish this place," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "to replace it with something new." Logan Price stepped forward nervously. "Mr. President, we've secured federal funding for a modern community center. The plans have already been approved." "By whom?" the president asked mildly. "The town council, sir." It was a unanimous vote. President Langston nodded thoughtfully, looking from the old church to Calvin's humble repair station. "And what about Mr. Reed's bicycle repair service? Was that considered in your planning?" Marcus swallowed visibly. "We, determined it was an unauthorized use of municipal property, and created potential liability issues." "I see." The president's tone remained conversational, but those who knew him recognized the steel beneath the surface. "Let me tell you what I see, Mr. Price." "Logan Price, sir." "Mr. Price, I see a man who has served this community selflessly for decades. I see a place where children find help and hope. I see something rare in today's world, genuine service without expectation of reward." The president gestured toward Calvin's workbench. "No one should have the power to erase a place that creates hope, even if it's just through a small bicycle wheel." Turning to his staff, President Langston issued a directive that would change Harlan's Mill forever. "I want our community development grant restructured. Instead of demolishing this church, we'll restore it. Half will remain Reed's bicycle repair shop, properly equipped and weather protected. The other half can become your community center." The crowd erupted in cheers. Children jumped up and down, parents applauded, and elderly residents nodded approvingly. In that moment, years of unspoken appreciation for Calvin's quiet service found voice. Only Logan Price looked dismayed. "But sir, the plans, the contractors have already been selected. Then they'll have plenty of work restoring instead of demolishing." The president replied firmly, "This location will stand as a reminder that service and community aren't just concepts, they're actions. Actions like fixing a child's bicycle when no one else would." As word spread through the town, something remarkable began to happen. People who had remained silent when Calvin was being pushed aside, now came forward with stories. "He fixed my daughter's bike last winter," called a woman from the crowd. "We couldn't afford a new one for Christmas. He not only repaired it, but somehow found a purple basket to add to the handlebars. She was so proud." An elderly man stepped forward. "When my arthritis got too bad to ride my three-wheeler, he modified the handlebars so I could still get to the pharmacy independently. Wouldn't take a dime for it." One by one, residents shared their experiences with Calvin's quiet generosity. The collective weight of these stories transformed the atmosphere from celebration to something more profound. A community's recognition of its own oversight in valuing what truly mattered. During a hastily arranged press conference in the churchyard, President Langston made two startling announcements. First, the federal grant for Harlan's Mill would be doubled with the stipulation that Calvin Shaw be consulted on all aspects of the church's restoration. Second, he revealed something about Calvin that even longtime residents didn't know. Mr. Shaw served with distinction in Korea. He was awarded the Bronze Star for valor, after rescuing 3 wounded comrades under heavy fire. Like many of his generation, he never spoke of his service, never sought recognition. Calvin stood uncomfortably beside the president, his eyes downcast as his military service was mentioned. It had been over 60 years since he'd worn a uniform, and he'd never used his veteran status to seek advantages or recognition. The revelations continue. A presidential aide distributed copies of a document showing that Calvin had been quietly donating most of his small military pension to the local children's hospital for decades. Another paper revealed that he had refused multiple offers to sell his bicycle repair methods as a franchise, preferring to keep his service local and personal. As these details emerged, Logan Price's political instincts finally kicked in. He approached the microphones announcing his immediate resignation as head of town planning. "I failed to recognize the true value Mr. Shaw brings to our community," he admitted. "I was focused on progress at the expense of preservation." The president accepted Price's resignation with a nod,
then made one final announcement. Today, I'm honored to present Calvin Shaw with the Presidential Citizens Medal, one of our nation's highest civilian honors. It recognizes Americans who have performed exemplary deeds of service for their country or fellow citizens. As he placed the medal around Calvin's neck, the old man finally spoke up. "Mr. President, this isn't necessary. I just didn't want kids to have to push their bikes in the winter." The simplicity of his statement, the pure unadorned motivation behind decades of service, moved many to tears. The president himself seemed momentarily at a loss for words. The most powerful moment came unexpectedly. As official proceedings concluded, a 7-year-old girl pushed through the crowd, clutching a homemade cupcake on a paper plate. She approached Calvin shyly. "My mom says I should give you this," she said, holding up the slightly lopsided tray. "She says I can't pay you money for fixing my bike yesterday, but kindness should be fed with something." Calvin knelt down, his knees protesting but his heart full, and accepted the cupcake with the solemnity of receiving a state gift. "Thank you, young lady. This cupcake is still warm, just like children's hearts when they ride their bikes." The girl beamed and scampered back to her mother, unaware that her simple gesture had perfectly captured the essence of the day's event. By evening, national news programs were leading with the story, "The Bicycle Repairman and the President." Social media exploded with the hashtag #, Be More Like Calvin, as people share their own stories of unsung heroes in their community. The president's press secretary announced that Air Force One would remain overnight, as the president wished to spend more time with Calvin and the people of Harlan's Mill. That evening, they shared a meal at the town's only diner. The President of the United States and the bicycle repairman, who had inadvertently shaped his worldview, surrounded by townspeople still processing the day's events. Over apple pie, President Langston leaned in and asked, "Why bikes, Mr. Of all the ways you could have served, why choose bicycle repair?" Calvin considered the question. Fork paused midway to his mouth. "When I came back from Korea, I was broken inside, couldn't find peace. One day I saw a kid crying over a busted bike chain. Fixed it with what I had in my pocket." The look on his face when that chain caught and the wheels turned again. He set down his fork, eyes distant with memory. "Something inside me started turning again too. Found I could sleep that night without the nightmares. So I fixed another bike the next day, and the next." Eventually the memories of war got pushed aside by the memories of children smiling. "That's healing you can't get from a bottle or a doctor." President Langston nodded slowly. "So all these years, every bike you fixed was fixing me too." Calvin finished simply, "Guess we all need Mine just happened to have 2 wheels in a chain." As the dinner concluded, the president made one final unscripted gesture. He presented Calvin with a small wooden box. Inside was a key, not symbolic, but practical. "This opens a dedicated workshop space at the White House," President Langston explained. "Once a month, if you're willing, we'd like you to come teach White House staff and Secret Service members how to repair bicycles. They'll then offer free repairs to children in DC's underserved community." For the first time that day, Calvin's composure broke slightly. His eyes glistened as he accepted the key. "Be honored, Mr. President. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated then honored, just in time? Type justice, if you believe justice is always present." 6 months after the president's unexpected visit, Calvin Shaw's bicycle repair station had undergone a transformation without losing its essential character. A proper awning now protected his workspace from the elements, professionally lettered with the words, "The Quiet Repairman," since his tools, still organized with military precision, now included state-of-the-art equipment, donated by manufacturers who had been moved by his story. The old church had been beautifully restored, its sanctuary divided between a modern community gathering space and an expanded workshop where Calvin now taught bicycle repair skills to local youth. A small museum area near the entrance displayed photographs and artifacts, telling the story of the bicycle repairman and the president, including the famous photograph of young David with his red bicycle. Calvin himself remained unchanged by fame or recognition. Each morning, he arrived at 8 o'clock, ready to help whoever came through the door. When children arrived with broken bicycles, his response was always the same: "Let me see what I can do." Once a month, he still traveled to Washington, D.C. to teach his bicycle repair program at the White House. The initiative had expanded beyond all expectations, with similar programs launching in 50 cities across the country. Thousands of children in disadvantaged communities now had working bicycles, thanks to the ripple effect of Calvin's example. On a crisp autumn afternoon, a young boy watched Calvin repairing a twisted bicycle wheel, fascinated by the old man's deft movements and focus. "Why don't you open a big repair shop?" the boy asked. You could fix more bikes and make lots of money. Calvin's hands never stopped working as he considered the question. Some things don't need to be big, he replied. They just need to be right. The boy's mother, overhearing the exchange, nodded appreciatively. Later she explained to her son, Miss Calvin taught our entire town, and even the president, that value isn't measured by size or recognition. It's measured by consistency and heart. As Calvin completed the wheel repair and spun it to check his work, a small brass plaque caught the sunlight. Recently installed on the workshop wall, it bore words that captured his life's philosophy. A wheel turning again can push an entire life forward. Below it, another plaque added, value isn't in the sign outside, it's in hands that never refuse to help. And finally, a third inscription completed the collection. You might not remember his name, but if you ever had a childhood bicycle, you probably owe someone like him. Just one small act of kindness can change a terrible day, a life, and sometimes even the world. Tell us about an act of kindness you received that you'll never forget. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where kindness spreads every day. Calvin never believed his hands would be remembered, yet here they were, etched into policy, woven into programs, shaping childhoods he'd never meet. He didn't chase legacy, he just fixed what was broken. One spoke, one pedal, one heart at a time. And somewhere between the grease and the gratitude, he'd helped build a gentler world. Remember, hitting like isn't just for the video, but for the truly valuable people in life. We told their story, you gave it meaning. Thank you.